just gave you permission.
Okay, I am recording on my end. I will be recording now on Audition, so I will disappear. Have fun, y'all.
Cool. So Andrea, just ask the question as you would in your own cadence. You don't have to ask it exactly as it's written if you don't want to, but if it's easier, feel free.
Okay.
I'd rather just talk if that's okay.
Huh?
I'd rather just talk if that's okay. I mean, we can sort of hit some of these highlights as we go, but in general, I think it will probably be a little bit more natural if we don't go line by line.
Yeah, I feel like as usually when the interviews get going, they just kind of roll and then it's fine.
Okay.
But yeah, we'll see. If we have to go line by line, we will. Otherwise, it'll just be conversational. Andrea, you'll be great. You did fine last time.
I didn't. I have to go line by line. I get so nervous and then I don't know. I was talking to my husband about it and he was like, just think of general concepts and you'll be fine. And I'm like, I'm not like a fast processor. I'm a really slow processor and I just need time to like really, later I'll be like, oh, I should have said this in the moment. And I never, it's fine. It's fine.
Your kazoo intro is making it into our IAB upfronts video, just so you know.
That's amazing. I love it. Should I start it off with a kazoo? Should I start the podcast off with a kazoo?
Yeah, could you?
Do you have one?
I do. Of course I do.
I'm not going to lie. The kazoo on the website startled me. I didn't realize it would start playing if I hovered over it. And like, it was totally accidental. It was like, I'm like, oh God.
That's Dre. Dre, I don't know if you know this about her, but she was in a kazoo band in college.
Oh my gosh. That's so funny.
So when we announced the rebrand, she's like, oh my God. And she sent like videos of her playing the kazoo at some event. And one of the jingles was really catchy. And we're like, Dre, will you use that? Can we use that for sort of the site? Yeah, absolutely. I think she went into like the studio to record it.
Oh my gosh. How funny is that?
Makes me so happy.
That's so good.
Just the ridiculousness of it. I don't know.
It's so ridiculous. But like he sent me the picture of like it being a kazoo, and I was like, I love kazoos, and he was like, haha, and I was like, no, I'm serious. I was in like a college a cappella singing group, and our only instruments that we used were kazoos. They were attached to our overalls.
And there's videos of this, or at least of the audios of it. So, yeah, I'm a huge fan, and Dre appears in most everything that we do from a kazoo playing standpoint.
One day I'll collect my commissions.
Yeah, you should. Oh, and then you have the sticker on the bottle
Sure enough,
too.
there it was.
I love kazoos, like I really do.
Oh my gosh.
We lucked into that one.
Yeah. Okay, sorry, Lindsay.
No.
Yeah, you want to do something today, but Dre and I are just catching up.
I'm not in a hurry. All right. Okay. Well, Sean, thank you for agreeing to join us on today's episode. I'm sure a lot of our listeners actually know who you are since we do draw in more of the audio advertising crowd. But if you don't mind introducing yourselves for those who don't, that would be awesome.
Sure. I'm one of the founders here at Podsights. We do podcast attribution for brands and advertisers.
Awesome.
Brands and agencies. Let me try that again. Hi, you're going to cut this later. Hi, I'm Sean from Podsights. We do podcast attribution for brands and agencies.
Awesome.
Thanks, Brady.
Can you actually break down how Podsights came to be and how it works, and kind of explain it to me as if I've never heard it before?
Sure. So, podcasting is a very interesting medium in that it's not radio, but it's also not digital, in that we have some digital signals like downloads and user agents and households, that kind of things. And we have brand pixels that, much like Facebook pixels or Twitter pixels, like what they use on the digital side to do attribution. But it's not sort of the same as digital in that we don't have user identifiers. The best we can do is household level data. So how it came about is that we started building tools on the research side, right? Like who's actually buying ads. And then we moved into the reporting side, like, how many downloads are these agencies getting? And then we talked to people like from ad results, et cetera. And they're like, that's not the problem. The problem is attribution. Like we just can't figure out if this stuff works. There's a lot of people that have made, a lot of good investment decisions in podcast marketing very early on through discount codes and low CPMs and all these other fun things, and they figured out it was working. But as the industry expands here, it's no longer a small market, right? It will be $1 billion, and then it will be 2, and then it will be 3, and then sky's the limit kind of thing. And to entice some of these advertisers that can't use discount codes or vanity URLs are just notoriously inaccurate for a lot of advertisers, pixel-based attribution seems to be what works, and that's not to say that people don't have success otherwise, but what we have found is that in order to sort of validate that podcast is working for a brand and then to sort of increase scale, test it to new networks and to new shows, the pixel-based attribution methodology works well for sort of making brands comfortable with a very different medium than a lot are used to.
So I actually thought of this yesterday when I was thinking about talking about this with you, but I'm sure this isn't something that you kind of dreamed of doing since you were like 10 years old, starting a podcast attribution platform.
You should see what I tell people when they're like, what do you do? I was like, podcast advertising. What? So yeah, no, I'm with you.
But, how did you kind of get to the point where you decided to create this? Was there some major event that motivated you? What was like your background before? Was it in attribution? Was it in research?
No.
Or yeah?
It's in tech startups. This is my second startup. The first one was called Embedly. It was in the media space. So we worked with people like Reddit, and LinkedIn, and Salesforce, and Microsoft to basically build the functionality that, like, if you paste a URL into a text box, it automatically expands into the video, whatever. In general, I like solving problems. I like sort of building tech solutions to solve them and working on sort of small teams that start something from just sort of the idea phase into sort of a full-blown product. Podcasting wasn't on my radar, to be completely honest with you. We were in social retargeting. We found that interesting, just watching buddies spend a ton on Facebook and Twitter and doing absolutely no optimization and just saying like, we'll let them handle it. That was a bad idea, and we wasted like 6 months. And then I was in a bar drinking with a buddy, and he was like, hey, podcasting. He was in market research, and he was like, basically, we know that our brand should get into podcasting, but we have no idea who's even in podcasting. And then it just starts sort of that cascade of following into it, right? Where you go from one step, okay, let's just see who's in advertising, and then talk to them and figure out what their problems are, and then talk to them, the agencies and the brands and et cetera. So it took us a solid year and a half to get really any traction. And then once the traction hit and people like, ad results started saying like, hey, these guys might know what they're doing. That's when, we started to grow.
There was an ice cream truck outside, so I had to mute it. Sorry.
It
felt very loud. I don't know if y'all could hear it, but I'll try to mute myself in between my questions. Okay, I feel like
you wound up in podcast advertising too, right? So
yeah.
I mean, how did you get here?
Well, it's not about me today.
Well, I mean, this is how conversations work.
I'm curious myself.
How I got here?
Yeah.
Well, I was a sports marketing major, sports management, but focused on marketing, and knew I wanted to do something in marketing. I always thought I wanted to work for a sports team. And then I worked for a sports team and basically got zero pay for working 90-hour weeks, and it was a mess. And I decided, I would actually rather have a job where I make enough money to go to games and not work them. So I started looking for jobs in marketing. I worked for a brand agency for a little while and then did marketing for a commercial real estate company and kind of hated that. So I started looking for a job, and one of my sports connections actually referred me to a friend of his that worked for Ad Results at the time. So I went into the interview. It was Christine. You didn't know her. She was here before, not Christine Paulson. It was Christine, I don't even remember her last name now. She left within 3 months actually of me starting. But yeah, she was out of there. But I just started working on the AT&T account, and it was way more radio focused, but I knew that podcasts were kind of growing, and I listened to podcasts myself. And as we started kind of seeing the industry boom, I kept asking my manager, Jen, can I please manage an account for podcasts? Can I please manage an account on my own? And eventually she gave me an opportunity to do that. And it was actually more radio focused, but they also had some podcasting that they were doing. And I did a good enough job with that they started giving me more accounts, and I had to learn really quickly. And I think one of the things that has, obviously podcasting didn't attract me to Ad Results because we weren't really doing it. I started with Ad Results in 2013, but I will say it has kept me here because it is such a fast and ever-changing industry, and I really thrive in fast-paced environments most of the time. So I like to learn all of the new things. I like to be, in the know of what's going on, and I think
that's how you became
having something being that attribution, it was just I kind of lucked out, right? I had a client that was interested in it, and Wondery, one of the networks that we work with, was really trying to push us to test it, and I convinced them to do a test with the minimum spend commitment, and it turned out that they were really happy with it. And so then we kind of just took it from there.
But then you became sort of the point person for all of Ad Results and on attribution in general. So my question to you is how did you get interested in that? And is that just you fell into it, or is it part of this wanting to learn new things?
I think probably a little bit of both. I like being the person that people come to for help. I'm a number 2 on the Enneagram, so I like helping other people. And it's we don't need to get into that, but I'll tell you later. I'll Slack it to you.
Dre's got all the info on that.
Isn't it one of those Briggs-Myers kind of things? The same thing?
It's similar, but it never changes.
Oh,
I have a presentation. Yes, I do.
Right.
I'm an 8.
Yes, you are. Anyway, I like to help people. I, had a client that saw success with this, and then it was really something that as an agency, we decided we wanted to pursue on a larger scale. And I kind of offered up my help to leadership. I said, we need a man in charge. We need someone to kind of lead the way here from a strategist perspective. We need someone to be in constant communication with Podsights, and I volunteered myself to do that. So kind of fell in it and also kind of volunteered.
Yeah. And from a benefit side of things, what was the decision that Ad Results made? I mean, why were they okay, this attribution thing isn't going to be just a flash in the pan. We view this as something that's going to be in the industry for a while. What was the change there?
Yeah, so I think our agency as a whole, we've always known that podcast and radio both probably do a lot better than what we give them credit for, or than what our clients give them credit for. So I think being able to measure that from an attribution perspective, where we can actually have, here's a download and here's a person that went to your website and checked out, is huge, right? We've never been able to have that kind of data before on podcasting. It's really just coupon code or a vanity URL. Some of our clients don't even have that I don't want to say sophisticated of a tracking method. A lot of them just don't have offers, and so they can't do a code. But some of them only measure by survey, and some of them really can't measure on a show-by-show level. So being able to
if you're on 80 shows, right, or run a network kind of thing, like you're not going to have a list of 80 podcasts to say which one do you get this on, right?
Well, some people do that. Like we have clients that do that, where there's a drop-down list of shows, and you have to go and pick it. But again,
the user behavior behind that, right? Like how dedicated do you have to be to a show to like scroll to, like, you know, especially if it's a Z title podcast.
Right, which is something that we've kind of seen is there are shows that people are such dedicated listeners to that host that they will scroll for days to find that host's name just to make sure that that host gets the credit. But then, there's a lot of other shows where there may not be that listener to host relationship that you can foster through listening to a host over and over again. Limited series,
great
for
content.
example.
Oh yeah, that's a really good example. Yeah.
Or it's like shows that it's a random season, it's a random host, no one really knows the host, you don't get to know them, they're just telling you a story. You don't really feel any kind of obligation or, you know, loyalty to that host. So you don't really care about scrolling through 80 names to find that show. But like, if you listen to Joe Rogan, you want to give Joe Rogan credit. So
of course.
attribution kind of helps us. And we saw the potential there of being able to show all of our clients that it works better than we think it does, and gives us even more data on a show by show or even network level of what's actually working and what's driving volume to their site and conversions.
Yeah, I mean, that's somewhat how we think about it as well, is specifically relative, right? Like it doesn't make one show, one advertiser doesn't make a whole ton of sense to spin up Podsights and the attribution and pixel based, right? Because it takes up a lot of time. But specifically when you're doing cross publisher and or, you know, a large network, it makes a ton of sense to figure out, because not all these shows are created equal. Some are going to work bangers for some brands, and some just aren't, right? And specifically when we start talking about like overlap between publishers, like how does that sort of play? And we've done studies here where it's really nice to have on multiple people saying your name, right? It's not like Joe Rogan's sort of the outlier, and we hate talking about him because, like, honestly, like, you know, he can sell cow shit and people are going to buy it, right? But there's sort of the you know, the network wide things where we need to think about like how do we sort of scale advertising here, because at the end game, like, our goal was to make podcast advertising bigger, right? There's still a ton of unsold inventory. There's still a lot of shows and, you know, smaller podcasters that are not getting paid as much as they should be, just because they're basically trying to have to, you know, find advertiser after advertiser and churn, et cetera. So, you know, from a pixel-based side of things, yeah, like that's something we talk about a lot, is, you know, optimizing, scaling, really validating the investment in the space, which it's a good investment, so we should all make it.
I agree.
From a more tactical side, I mean, I think you've seen this before, but the setup isn't as bad as a lot of people make it out to be, right? So how sort of attribution works in general is, you know, we have integrations with all the hosting providers. There's what's called a tracking URL for the dynamic insertion. So if you're doing run of network or run of show, it's server to server side. For some of the smaller independent guys, we have what's called an analytics prefix that you know, the host installs, sort of very simple, very easy. And then it's, you know, it's just a pixel on the brand side of things. So you know, we're not, which can be done as, you know, smaller shops can be done in a matter of 15 minutes. For larger shops, you know, where there's it can take a matter of days, but you know, the lift isn't that hard. And then what we do is basically match households. So it's not user level attribution, it's panel based, right? In that we have had numerous conversations about, you know, noisy IPs versus corporate IPs versus cell towers and everything else along those lines. But, you know, basically 50% of all downloads happen at a household, and then we get nice data there where we can say someone at this household visited the brand site after being exposed to an ad, and then we do a lot of modeling after that to say, well, what does the rest of the space, the IP users that we just can't do any attribution for, how do we think they're going to interact with the site? And that's how we come up with sort of a modeling behavior after that. So it's not some of the survey-based ones and some of the discount URL code ones are, we just apply a random multiplier. As from a methodology standpoint, like it's the same whether it's one campaign versus the other, which sort of makes it a little bit easier to do some of the validation and what shows are working, what do we need to sort of rotate out.
So you just said, did you say 50% on average?
Yeah, it used to be, so like pre-COVID, it was 30%. We'd see sometimes it would be larger multipliers. Post-COVID, we were seeing a lot of people stay home, which is good, right. And therefore sort of the attribution actually gets better. And things like smart speakers, for example, that are actually tied to the household, we have that's more information that we can use there. And by the way, smart speakers do really well, right? Because they just work. So I would buy smart speaker if I were you.
I have some. Thank you.
No, I mean your plans. That's neither here nor there.
Yeah. I was like, no, I already have that. That's fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but that's really interesting. I am surprised it's not more than 50% with everyone working from home. Like, is that kind of how it's balanced back out, since some places and some cities are going back to work?
Yeah, I mean, like sometimes you're just not connected to your Wi-Fi, or any number of different things can happen there. It's just sort of user behavior. And, I gotta let my dog in. I'll be right back. She would have just sat there whining at the door for an hour. She's a good girl though. So no, we didn't see it come down to 100% of people staying at home, right? Because people, essential workers, et cetera, there's still a lot of commutes going on. There's still people walking around, which is, in outdoor spaces. We did a bunch of studies here that around, COVID and downloads like everybody else did. Sort of there was a decay, and now it's coming back up, and all those other fun stuff. But it's from our standpoint, like we're not trying to shame people for not staying home and downloading more podcasts, right? So maybe we should be. Who knows? And then we covered a lot of these.
Yeah, I was just trying to find where we kind of were. Okay. So since launching Podsights, you guys launched a little over a year ago, maybe longer, but I know we started working with you guys a little over a year ago.
Yeah, exactly. It's, basically we've been around since 2018, but July 2019 is when we sort of really got going.
Gotcha. So what's been the most surprising thing that you've learned since starting Podsights?
Podcasting is a mess, right? It's not as simple as, I just give Google some money and I get some search ads, or there's a massive display network that, RTB bidding and all those other fun stuff where, I can be on 1,000 different sites for digital, right? Like it's on a case by case, it's a one by one. So most of podcasting is just people issues, right? It's not actually a lot of technology some of the times, right? So if you're running a campaign across 10 different publishers, it can be 10 different hosting companies, it can be 10 different sales teams. I mean, a lot of it is still like RFP gets sent out, people reply to it, like it's not as sophisticated as some of the digital points. And there's obviously a lot of pros there, right? In that the medium is way more authentic because of it. So when we went out and started building it, we were basically like, okay, well, eventually this is all going to be, some big ad server somewhere that is going to own it. And that was surprising to me, and how diverse the space is, and it's all over the place. It's not like sort of New York and there's hubs all over the place, which is super interesting for us. We are growing faster than I thought we would, to be honest with you. Attribution in general, is the space has sort of really taken off in the last year or so, right? As the hosting providers got better, as some of we and a few other people came into the space and said, like, this is actually something that should be solved, and the market got big enough, right? You can't have sort of a venture-backed business in sort of smaller markets, and it's really hard. It would have been really hard to basically start Podsights without VC capital, because of the fact that, like, you have to wait a long time. It's like 2 years in order for us to get somewhere near and you need a lot of engineering talent in order to make that happen as well. But the industry has progressed, and it's very similar in some ways to how digital progressed too, and that you had sort of a lot of small publishers, and there's obviously going to be some consolidation. You've seen that around Spotify and Liberty Media, etc. But there's still sort of this nice world of sort of the independents and individual publishers that we like to see, at least. And from a buying perspective, right, it gives you a ton of options.
Yeah. And so it really has blown up in the past year. I mean, we've seen other vendors pop up too. So how do you think about staying competitive with everything still so new, with, you guys are still, I think you guys have your dashboard in a really good spot, but you're still constantly changing and evolving and taking requests from us and from clients, and like, how do you—
You're answering your own question. You're literally answering your own question, right? I mean, that's how we do it, right? Is that we got here, fairly early. Our whole job is not, again, because of people problems, etc. Like, a lot of what we invest in is we invest in account management and partnerships, and making sure that when someone comes in the front door, that they know exactly what to expect, that they have a team, because it's not like digital, where you can just spin up a dashboard. Like, there's a lot of explaining things to go through, and on the methodology, etc. From a product standpoint, yeah, I mean, it's constantly just taking feedback and iterating, right? It's building things for people that you wouldn't have thought of, and I think that's what I like most about sort of building tech startups, right? Is that once you have sort of that initial user base, the product basically builds itself, right? As long as you're smart about it. It's taking sort of that feedback and saying, okay, like, how do we not build some one-off for one different client, but make it so that we solve the issue, but it works for 10 clients, and then go sell 10 more clients and go figure out their problems, and et cetera. So it's constantly evolving, right? We went from sort of measuring a single campaign to measuring multiple campaigns, doing incremental lift, to doing a lot of, overlap analysis and frequency and reach, etc. Never mind the ad pulling stuff and sort of analyzing some of the audio files. That sort of makes it sort of ground up podcast first, and that's sort of where we have done really well, is being podcast first. Some digital providers will come in and give you a pixel and say, hey, it's gonna, but podcasting is different in the fact that, like, there's no standard, and you're integrating with on a case-by-case basis with a lot of different hosting providers. Never mind, like, how do we even count a download, right?
Yeah. Question that we all want answered.
Well, I mean, I think that's always going to change too, right? And mostly because of none of us control the player, which is a right, where you have sort of a vertically integrated product like Spotify. Spotify owns the player, they own the content, they own the ad insertion, etc. Like, you can get a little bit better on the things, but they just don't have the scale for that sort of inline thing. Most of their downloads come from third parties, and Apple just doesn't care about that for business, because they're a $2 trillion company now. And podcasting is a surrounding area, but it's a nice app to have on the phone that's free content that anybody can see, that makes the sort of the platform a little more enticing. Again, our job is to sort of work within those constraints and say, like, downloads, we don't feel that like getting within a percentage point of an impression number is all that important. What we think is the downstream metrics obviously matter, and I think that you guys have done a really nice job of popping that to clients too. But even back in the discount codes and surveys, right? It was like, who cares about the number of impressions they're getting? Like, how many sales are they driving, and how much are we paying for the media, right? Because if that's positive, we should do more of that. That's negative, we should do less of that. Which I think translates really well from the attribution side of this thing. So we try not to get into arguments with people and say like, okay, well, it was actually 101 downloads versus 99. That is not an interesting argument to anybody, right? Like, what we care about is that it drove 5 purchases, and therefore, like, that was a good investment, and we should go and do that again.
Right. Do you think, just talking about all of the constraints that you do have, what would you say has been your biggest challenge so far as a company?
Convincing people we weren't going to blow up their business, to be honest with you, right? A lot of people have made a lot of money in this space, like just, selling impressions, right? And then letting the brand figuring out whether it was going to work or not. And we had a hell of a time convincing the agencies and the brands in the first place, specifically the agencies, right? Because they're like, well, it's working right now, we're doing well. Like, we don't need, and we're still having that problem with a lot of different people saying like, we're here to help, right? Are we going to show like that every single one of your show converts amazing? No, we're not. But what we continue to find is that a brand is less likely to churn if they have the information to improve. So even if their first campaign does not do all that well, right, they can go back with a whole, dashboard worth of data and say like, okay, well, this little part did, right? And they're used to that, right? They're used to throwing 1,000 ads at a Facebook and saying like, okay, this one worked really well. Let's go sort of figure out why it did really well, and then double down on that. And I think that's where we've sort of had our success, is like, accidentally falling into one campaign with one brand and one agency, and then showing them sort of that sort of cycle, and then watching the brand react to that level of, insights versus, a spreadsheet after the fact that like this discount code got six purchases and we're going to give it a multiplier of 3.2 because of the survey, right? That's sort of a harder sell sometimes to make an agency or a brand, or specifically a brand, love the medium. We like dashboards. We like looking at things as humans, right? Like, they're just something that we do. I don't know.
So I'm kind of curious, just because I'm more on the creative side over here at Ad Results, is there anything specific that stands out to you, like when you're looking at this data that's like, yep, that campaign absolutely killed it? Or like, what exactly would you be looking for that just stands out as like, this was absolutely successful?
Here's the problem, right? Like, where we think the agencies and brands are, well aligned, is that they know the product, they know the numbers, they know everything about it. So they can look at so a conversion rate or a sort of a CPA, et cetera, and say like, this is working or this isn't, right? So there's some campaigns that we've done where it's, they've had horrible conversions rates, and the brand's like, yeah, nailed it. Like, because of the fact that like they're used to getting such low conversion rates on everything else that they do, that even though like we only drove 3 purchases, that 3 purchases just happen to be for a $3,000 product, and therefore it's ROI positive, and we're good to go, right? Where we've had sort of from the creative side where we've had the most success is when brand messaging aligns with content, right? So some of the policy geniuses that work with us, right? And some of the earlier things that when we've seen sort of a policy genius do really well on a show, it's when sort of there's that alignment. And you might have to cut this later, but I'm going to tell you the story that I've had remember the O.J. Simpson podcast, right? Where policy genius just crushed it, right? Because when are you thinking about life insurance while you're listening to someone get murdered, right? and I think that sort of alignment, when it happens organically, or even if they back into it that way, like that does really well. You're probably not gonna be able to use that, but like that's, you know, sometimes we use examples like that and saying like when creative and content align really well, does well. There's obviously, you know, targeting helps for some of the dynamic inserted podcasts when you can target based off of either, you know, you can't do male female, right, but you can try to do things around like health and wellness or IT decision makers, things like that. Sometimes that works really well, and sometimes it doesn't. Mostly it's around experimentation, and that's what we try to harp on is, you know, ABC creative, pre-roll, mid-roll, don't buy post rolls. You know, make sure the frequency is on a reasonable scale. Some people will shove you into a back catalog and you'll have a frequency of 100 and wonder why it's not doing all that well. Well, because, you know, no one's going to listen. Someone downloaded 100 episodes, but they're only going to listen to one of them. You know, we tell people to buy first runs, whether it be dynamically inserted or embedded, right? First run is always going to do really well. And generally it's, you can't come into this industry with $1,000 and buy some ads, right? Which sort of is not great for people that are used to Facebook advertising, where you can spend $1,000 and see some sort of ROI analysis. And you have to be in the 10 to 20 to 30 thousand in order to even get a clear sense of what's working and what's not. Because what you don't want to do is spend 5,000 on a sort of a back catalog because, you know, it's the cheapest thing, and then you know, churn because you had no idea whether it worked or not. I skewed away from your creative question. I'm not sure if that happens, but, you know, obviously endorsements are better than non-endorsements, right? Even though we've seen some of the NPR style ads do really well, specifically some of the pre-roll stuff, because it's a consistent narrator, which is nice, versus sometimes where you'll see like the Geico commercials get dropped into the middle of a podcast. You know, like, what the hell are we even doing here, right? So, you know, those obviously do not work all that well. And then, yeah, with increased scale, sort of lowers some of the conversion rates because of the fact that you are reaching just a really broad audience versus some of the narrowing that you can do on a show-by-show basis.
Yeah. So I guess kind of the last question we have is just what's next?
Dre's going to tell me. I mean, some of that's it's honestly fairly true, right? Some of the times that we're going to see, you know, we continue to see brands that are newer to the space that push us towards you know, very interesting features that we can add to the product. You know, I don't think that we're going to get to the, you know, it's never like we're going to get more data, right? We're on the user. We're just not like, you're never going to see those kind of insights come in. We're never going to know who actually downloaded the podcast because none of this industry is vertically integrated. And that's actually a fairly decent thing. So it's a lot of what we're doing now is really just about how do we tell a brand an interesting story about how their campaign performed, and not just show them a line chart. Because that's, you know, at the end of the day, everybody likes looking at graphs, but then the next question is like, now what, right? So we have now a data analyst that is dedicated on our team, that any brand can say like, hey, you need some help, and we'll sort of dig into them with it. We've added some of the lift reports for specific reasons, for more touch points to say like, this is doing well, or this isn't doing well, and I think that's sort of important here. And then, so, you know, some of the optimization side of things, but at the end of the day, yeah, I mean, like, what we want to do is sort of allow people to be more always on versus, you know, do one campaign, spend 3 months figuring out whether it worked, and then trying it again, right? Like we'd like to shorten that cycle, so it's, you know, three months on, you know, a week to look at something, and then let's keep on going, because, you know, this is doing well and this isn't, and that and discovery is obviously a problem that we continue to think about, like, how do we help brands even find podcasts advertise on. Like Ad Results obviously has a massive database of all the back catalogs of everything that they've ever done. So they can say like, well, for these 8 shows, you should expect that thing, right? You don't. But we're starting to get benchmarks, right, which is really helpful for brands, so that when they're specifically with publisher sales, when they're trying to sell people into a podcast, they know like, okay, well, this is good, this is bad from a conversion rate standpoint, which will help them sort of make better decisions about what to buy and what not to buy.
Awesome.
Mostly Jay's going to tell me.
I'll do my best.
Yeah, exactly.
No pressure, Dre. No pressure. Well, cool. Well, that covered pretty much all of our questions, and look at that. We didn't have to go line by line.
We didn't.
Hey, nailed it. That's good.
Nailed it.
Yeah, we work with a bunch of people, 200 plus brands, 250 brands. We've done sort of 1.2 billion impressions over campaigns at this point. We have sort of a really large data set in order to say, this is attribution is something that a lot of people want and will be here for a very long time. What else do you want me to go on in this?
I was just about to ask, was there, because I feel like even if we didn't ask the question directly, you did answer a lot of what we would have asked.
Yeah, you did.
Okay. Awesome. Well, hey, high fives all around.
High five.
Woo!
I feel like
Andrea,
the one
you
that we
did this
didn't
fun.
was how are you working to resolve discrepancies between your data and the ad server, which it didn't naturally come up, and
I
there's
don't
no
want to
real
shoehorn
data.
it in either.
Yeah, it's like
Talk a little bit about like the 101 downloads versus 99,
Yeah.
like let's use the downstream metrics. So I feel fine about that. Yeah, I don't know.
I think
You like
it was great.
Yeah, no,
Talk
I feel good about this and the conversation that was had.
Okay, cool.
So
All right.
thank you for joining us and hopping on today. We really appreciate it.
No, my pleasure. Good to see you always, Trey. Nice to meet you, Lindsay and Freddie. I know you were there just chatting away.
It's nice meeting you.
Always good to see you, Sean.
All right, have a good one. Thanks
You
all.
too.
You too. Thanks.
Bye.
Oh.
Bye.
Let me permanently unmute so I can stop pressing the space bar.
Oh,
That was good. You did a great job. I knew
Good
you would.
job.
I was like, okay, I'm just gonna talk and not. Part of it, he started interviewing me, and I was like, no, it's not about me. But I do feel like it helped me like go more into a dialogue with him versus just asking questions, which I'm generally not very good at.
I didn't realize that y'all knew each other, and so like when I introduced you, I'm just like,
Oh, I just assumed you were doing it for the podcast.
oh.
Oh yeah, no,
It
we
might
know
make it in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, Freddie, I would say keep some of the banter between Dre and Sean where they were talking about podcast stuff, but cut out the Enneagram banter.
Yeah, of course.
Also, like, you don't need to have my entire career background in there. Like, that was much help.
Yeah, we can probably cut that out, but
Mhm.
where you were talking about ad results and how you fell into I think that was good. And then it led to a natural segue for him to kind of talk about some stuff. So I think that that's good to keep.